Hello, fellow Deal Scouts. Welcome to another episode of the Deal Scout. I am your hostess, Susan Reilly, and our guest today has insightful lessons to share about land development as a real estate strategy. As a longtime private equity fund manager, Alice Chen has much to say about the investor's due diligence process, and I think you are going to learn tons from this conversation. Welcome, Alice. Hello.
Hi, Susan.
Hi,
Thank
thanks
you
for
for the
joining
intro.
us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Hey, before we jump into the talking about your business, I always think that it's interesting to learn more about the personal sides of my guests. And so, would you mind starting there? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Let me give you a little bit of my intro. And, I'm open book. So if you have specific questions, happy to dive into them. So I'm Alice Chen. I'm from Vancouver, BC. So my parents are from Taipei, Taiwan. So I actually was born in Taiwan and grew up there until I was 13 and immigrated to Vancouver, BC with my parents. So from there, went through schooling and was very good student. So I went to a great university, University of Toronto. So at the time, I had wanted to become a doctor. I mean, it was more of my parents' aspirations for their children. And so I enrolled in pre-med, but quickly found out by interning at hospitals and, doing clinical medical research programs that I don't quite like that work environment. I'm a pretty social person, but I would prefer to interact with people in a happier setting. So,
Okay.
quickly from there, I knew that was not my path, but, I had accomplished quite a bit. Actually, at 18, 19, I was able to publish a couple of scientific papers and abstracts at, the American Heart Cardiology Journal, European, Cardiology Congress. So, just kind of always excel academically, but change my career path to law. So I went from pre-med and then, decided to switch out of that. And then I decided to complete my scientific studies in physics. And then I completed the rest of my undergrad degree in philosophy, actually, because, as a young person, I had a lot of questions about life and about society and business. And so I did a lot of courses in that. And then from there, that was my kind of springboard into law school. So then I went to law school. My thought was that I knew myself and I knew I was very entrepreneurial. I knew I was going to be in business in some way, shape, and form one day, but I didn't know exactly what that looked like. I know that I didn't want to necessarily go into banking. My mom was a banker and I didn't want to do accounting, but I knew I wanted to do business. So I think as a young person, I just kind of held that vision of me going into business, without knowing exactly what. But eventually, what I had done is going to law school, practice law at a national law firm in Canada. And then from there, I had a business idea to go into my first business, which was an international trade. And that business actually quickly, within 3 years of founding, became a success story. And I was named top 40 under 40 by Business in Vancouver in 2013. So it's hard to
Wow.
believe it's more than 10 years ago now. Yeah. And so that first chapter of my entrepreneurial journey kind of cemented me as a business person in Vancouver. And then from there, I went back into mergers and acquisitions, which is the area I practiced in. I had a boutique, and that second business was acquired by PricewaterhouseCoopers, an international accounting firm. So I was there for a couple of years, met the people that were running the family office program. So then, decided to actually leave the mothership and start our own multifamily office. So we ran a multifamily office in Vancouver for a couple of years, which then actually segued and became a fintech company, so fintech startup. So the fintech startup, still thrives today. It's actually one of the top 100 family office fintech company named by Forbes magazine 2023. So
Wow.
I personally exited that, but my co-founder is still running that platform. Yeah, and then from there, the different things during COVID. I was a startup founder in CPG in a tequila seltzer company, as well as, running this fintech. And yeah, and then now I'm back in the investment field. So throughout my, active business and the evolution of my entrepreneurial journey, I've always actually really loved investing and
Mhm.
investing my own capital, and eventually became a fund of funds manager in Canada. And then now, in the States, we're running a land development real estate fund.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I can hear the pride just booming from you and your voice. That is a lot of accomplishments in a very short period of time. That must have felt really good to you to get that far and as quickly as you did with your sales and your building and then selling. That's really must have been really rewarding. Um, do you think that can you look back and think that there was anything from your young life that might have triggered your interest in investing and building, selling companies?
So I think, there's always kind of a beginning and always an origin story behind every drive. So I think for me, I've always been interested in business. And so it's interesting because my mother is a textbook, um, professional, right? So she excelled in school as well, valedictorian, straight A student, and went through all the schooling, went to top schools, and then eventually became one of the first female bankers in Taiwan. So very accomplished woman.
Right.
And so from her, I knew that I kind of saw the glamorous side of business because she would get dressed up and go to work, every morning. So I knew she was doing something important, and I wanted to be like mom, right? And so that was kind of one kind of driver. So I knew I wanted to work in business but I didn't exactly know what that meant. But then my dad, on the other hand, it's very opposite of my mom. So they actually met in university in the same program, but he's actually a self-taught engineer. So he's a bit of a genius. So
Hmm.
he's very entrepreneurial. Yeah. So very, very much like created a telecommunications lab, just kind of out of thin air. And so, growing up as a young child, I saw my dad, as a solopreneur, for the first couple years of my life. I remember answering phone calls for him, as the receptionist. Like this would be when I was 5 or 6, right? And so my
Wow.
dad didn't have an employee at the time, so I was his little assistant, and he taught me a script. And no kidding, this was, when I was quite young. And so I learned from my dad that business can be fluid and what it looks like can be fluid. So on one hand, there's my mom, looking very professional, but on the other hand, I also learned that business can appear in, a variety of format. It can be pretty fluid. And I think what I picked up from both of them is that they both went to their mission, with pride, right? So they both love what they're working on. And so for me, especially watching my dad, like it didn't ever feel like he had a job. Like it always felt like he didn't have a job. He always had something that he's working on, but it never felt like he was going to a job or going to work. So yeah, so I think over time I morphed my personal self sort of morphed towards what that resembled to me at the time.
Mhm. That's a really rare perspective as a young person, as a young child, to see your mom and see her excelling and see her so put together and so professional, and then see your dad loving his job as a solopreneur. The two of those mingled together. I can see where that would push you to be successful and professional yourself, as which you are, of course. How do you think that you got from pre-med and law school, and then as an investor, how do you think that morphed into you becoming a fund manager today with a private equity company? How'd that happen?
Yeah, so I guess my path is not super conventional in terms of, how I became a fund manager. But I think there's a through line or a thread that runs through everything I've done. So pre-med is mostly about digesting an enormous amount of information and memorizing the information and detecting patterns,
Mhm.
right? So you have to understand how the body works, right? How
Right.
different systems work. So for me, what I really excel in would be kind of things that require logic. So I was very good in math, very good in physics. So things that had to do with causation, so cause and effect. I really did well. So I think from pre-med, it was, cementing more work ethics, because it's an immense amount of work that you gotta do, right? But even to go into a pre-med program, I mean, the work habits that I cemented as a child, as a young person, as a teenager, all the way into undergrad degree, I think that work ethics is very important. And I think as a fund manager, a lot of what you're doing is actually regimented work, disciplined work, right? So you're making investment decisions, checking against a due diligence process. Like we have a very rigorous 8-page due diligence process that we run every potential investment through. And we don't veer away from that, right? So we don't make emotional decisions. We don't make investment decisions based on hype, based on what other people are doing. In fact, we mostly will do what other people aren't doing. So very contrarian, based investing. So very disciplined, very kind of against the current. And I think as a fund manager, you have to have the ability and the temperament to be able to do that. So I think pre-med further cemented my work habits and, my discipline. And pre-law was more about kind of thinking expansively. So in philosophy courses, for example, it's more about, like thinking in a very analytical manner, but thinking broadly, right? So if you can think broadly, but at the same time in a very disciplined manner, then that gives you an edge. So in selecting our thesis, for example, it took us a couple years. Like we spent as a firm 3 years looking at different possible real estate strategies under the sun that may or may not be a good fit in the United States. And we decided in year 3 that land development is where we want to really solidify our strategy and our reputation. And so that is very much not something you would hear a lot of people talk about. It's not the most, known strategy. It has a heavy lift because there's an education component. But we find out the best strategies out there are often not the ones that everyone and their neighbors are talking about or are executing on. So we like the ones that are hard to understand, like maybe not hard to understand, but hard to craft a thesis that's easy for people to understand. But inherently, it's not maybe easy for people to understand because they don't hear about it on the news all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, it seems like land development is very systematized with the legalities, is what I'm speaking of. But you're also thinking broadly because you're thinking in a much bigger picture. Is that right? I mean, you're thinking across the country, really, not isolated to, North Georgia or Southwest South Dakota. You're thinking broadly across the U.S. So you're mixing the very narrow systematized path with a very expanded universe of land acquisition. So, right?
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, so it's that ability to think broadly, but at the same time staying disciplined in the investment thesis that makes us, differentiated and different.
Well, so then how did you learn how to become a general partner? Because that has some pretty unique qualifications, doesn't it, to be a general partner?
Yes. Yeah, so it's interesting because about 12 years ago, that's when I was running my second business, the Mergers and Acquisitions Advisory Boutique, which eventually sold to PricewaterhouseCoopers. So at the time, I was a media darling in Vancouver because I had done different interesting things in business, and so I appeared on various business publications and magazines. And so my now business James, he actually, I think, connected with me on LinkedIn. And so at the time, I had my first exit. And so I had amassed a little bit of my personal capital. And so I was very curious about private equity and the world of investing. And so when he connected with me 12 years ago, he was building his first fund in private equity. So I wanted to actually learn everything about it from him. And so I became an early investor in his first ever fund and said, hey, James, be my mentor, like teach me everything. I will, I'm happy to invest my own capital because I think a lot of investing has to be done through learning. It's like riding a bike, right? So you can read all about it, but until you start to actually do it yourself, like you don't really understand the game. And so I had done that. I, had done well and went on to actually help him raise money for his funds. And so it's really kind of learned by doing and by, being an apprentice in the process. And so to become a general partner, there's no like specific school requirements or, finance licensing requirements that you have to do. I mean, to raise money, if you're not the GP, to raise money for a fund, you have to be a registered FINRA representative, right? So you have to have a Series 7, Series 60 fund. But if you are the actual general partner, the owner of the fund, then there's actually an ownership exemption. So you don't have to have all of those securities, licensing in place. Yeah, so you just have to have the experience in business, in the subject matter, as well as the business acumen and the track record in investing to support your role as the GP.
Okay. So it was just learning by doing with somebody that kind of guided you along. That's how you learned to be a general partner. Did you ever have a really big business pitfall, and how did you recover from that?
Yes, I think the biggest one came through a partnership that was just kind of ill-formed. So it was a situation where I had joined 3 partners in an existing business. My superpower is actually coming into a situation that isn't quite working and then actually looking at how to problem solve to make it more optimized, right? So I saw an opportunity. I was actually a client in this firm. It's a firm in Canada that is in financial services. I was actually initially their client and saw how the industry operated, really liked the risk reward asymmetry and knew that that industry was ripe for disruption. So I knew I had the skill set to help this company kind of reconfigure and systemize what they're doing and product size what they're offering in order to help them scale. So, I came in and we did a good run together, a year and a half, but I think we scaled a little bit too aggressively. And also there's also partnership issues. So, 2 out of the 3 partners that I had joined, they were not of a growth mindset. Well, that experience is that, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you don't take the time to get to know some potential partners. Because a partnership, it's like a marriage, so it has to basically withstand a lot of ups and downs because business will have a lot of ups and downs. And so you want to take the time to get to know people, not only their values, but their work styles, as well as their aspirations. You wanted to make sure that you have ultimate alignment, right? And you also want to see people in different contexts. Like you want to see them in a social context, like maybe in meeting potential business partners, you want to meet their spouses, their children, and see kind of how they interact with other people around them, how other people interact with them or think of them. And I think you want to, if possible, like see if you can actually get to know them under stress.
Oh, okay. So with your investment partners, you've just said you want to know what their aspirations are, what their work styles are. You want to see them in a social context, and you want to know them under stress. So is there anything, are those the only things?
I think those are the key ones. Yeah. But of course, they've got to actually have the skill set to complement your skill set, right?
Right.
So if they check all the boxes on the business end of things, I think these other interpersonal, like soft side of things are very important to make sure you have alignment as well. So let me just give you a brief overview of exactly what we do. So land development is land entitlements as well as horizontal development, right? So turning raw land into finished lots for home builders to come in. So in our case, we work with land developers that work with home builders like the D.R. Horton, Lennar, these national home builders or regional scaled home builders. So we're the capital partners to the land developers that want to scale. So they are developing, tracts of land into 1,000 home lots, 2,000 home lots for the home builders to then come in and build homes. So that's who we work with. And so, yeah, we absolutely take the process of getting to know our land development operating partners very seriously. So we have, a roster of 3 or 4 right now that we work with, and it has taken us at least a year to actually get to know them. And this is a year of not even deciding to go into business together, but a very regular phone call, like every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks. We would have had a call last year to get to know them in the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what kind of land are you say raw land, but what kind of land and where are you looking for this?
Yeah, so we are actually, finance people, so we don't really make operating decisions, but just as as the thesis goes, most likely the land that we're interested in are the ones, it's data driven, so it's mostly dictated by the home builders. So for example, D.R. Horton may come to your land development partner and say, we're interested in building this community here, 500 homes. So this is the piece of land that we want to build here, based on our data, based on our research. Can you help us with the entitlements, right? Or it could be already entitled, and then they would come to a horizontal developer and say, can you, actually put in the roads and infrastructure here? So it's in a way driven by the end home builder themselves.
Okay. Yeah. So with your investors into this fund, then what are you looking for? What kind of investors?
Yeah, so we are looking for investors that are interested in growth. So you don't see your principal investment and the returns until a couple years later.
Mm-hmm.
But typically in that situation, the returns will be higher. So in our case, we are targeting a 25 to 27% IRR, and it's a 3-year fund. And so when, the investment matures or when the projects exit, then you're looking at, a 1.75 to 1.81 equity multiple. So
Okay.
that's a pretty fast way to actually accelerate the growth of your capital.
Do you have a minimum that you're
Yes.
wanting?
Yeah. So we work with accredited investors only, and
Okay.
the minimum is 100,000.
Okay. Well, what else can you tell us about your fund that is that you need to share with the world? Why do you feel like this is an important thing in the country right now?
Yeah, so there's actually a deficit of 4.8 million single family homes in the United States. And yeah, I think, we're fulfilling a big gap that actually started to get pent up since the 2010 financial crisis. So that's when home building really started to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
And then we then entered into a period of underbuilding. And then so things kind of picked up a little bit last couple of years, but now, because of the tariffs and uncertainties, like things are, they're continuing to move, and but things are maybe slightly slowed down right now as well. But that just means that in 2, 3 years, 5 years, we're gonna see a surge in that housing gap again. So this problem is not going away. Like D.R. Horton, being a $35 billion annual revenue company, they can only build up to about 100,000 homes a year. So even at that scale, they're America's #1 scaled builder.
Right.
They are only building, in that maximum capacity. So if you do the math, at 4.8 million of deficit, and that number's only growing, it would take the top 50 home builders in America more than 10 years to catch up and to fulfill that gap.
Yeah. So there's definitely a demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this demand is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's a big number. 4.8 million. That's a lot of homes that need to go up, isn't it? That's just astounding it. Fellow Deal Scouts, I invite you to reach out if you have further questions for Alice, or if you're thinking of investing in U.S. land development. Click the link below or find the link in the show notes, and I'll get you in touch with her. And as you know, I'm always on the hunt for interesting guests like Alice, where we can learn more about different and new deals because everybody loves a good investment, right? So if you'd like to appear on the Deal Scout to talk about your deals, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me at susan@thedealscout.com, or again, click the link below. So that's it for now. I hope you have a terrific day and we will see you again soon. Thanks again, Alice, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is Susan with the Deal Scout signing off.